intertwines with the inexplicable, where the boundaries of reason dissolve into the shadows of uncertainty. Welcome to the Political Twilight Zone. I am your guide through this enigmatic labyrinth, where politics and power take on life of their own. In this dimension, the threads of truth weave a tapestry of intrigue, challenging our perception of the world we thought we knew. In this world, nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. Prepare to venture where reason meets the unexplained, and where the unexplained might just be the ultimate.
Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us again this weekend here. It's Rick Wagner getting it right on KNZZ, KGLN, and the Internet, and podcasting, and who knows what else. So we're back, and wherever you're listening, we appreciate it. Really do. So there's a lot to talk about this week, and I took a lot of notes, which I have in front of me here, which is good, except for the fact that my handwriting deteriorates, or my understanding of it deteriorates. So if I wrote something, say, yesterday, I can read about 80% of it. But it was important stuff, because I wanted to get it right. Because, every few years, Washington decides to hold the country hostage. We call it a shutdown, but it's really just the same old performance, political brinkmanship. It's on our dime. So both sides are kind of backing at it again. The Republicans have a 34-page continuing resolution. I wanted to make sure that we just kind of laid this out again, because we keep hearing bits and pieces of it in the news, but we don't have kind of like the whole deal. So I wanted to make sure you have the right information so you know what's going on. Now, that continuing resolution is pretty straight. It just funds the government, trims some fat. That's about it. It's not a huge bill. You don't have to weigh it with a truck scale or anything like that. But the Democrats are holding out. And what they're holding out for doesn't really have much to do with reopening government. They're trying to keep their agenda locked in before they lose the leverage that they have. And they have a subsidy out there, that won't die, extending Enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies. The things that started during the pandemic, sort of little sweeteners, right? They were supposed to be temporary. Remember that word temporary? Well, you know what happens in Washington. There's nothing called temporary. They were going to expire once a crisis passed. If you go back and look at this under the Biden administration, it was supposed to, just for a little while. Washington doesn't do temporary. Once a subsidy is born, it grows legs, learns to vote, and never leaves. Now, Democrats are insisting, these tax credits stay in place, because that's what they are, maybe permanently. They say that without them, insurance premiums will skyrocket, which is probably true. But what they're not telling you is that those subsidies don't lower the cost of health care. They just shift the bill from the consumer to the taxpayer. So, it's just classic Washington math. Makes it look cheaper on the front end, and we hide the expense on the back end with tax dollars. The Republicans are just saying the emergency's over, the debt's over the horizon. If we keep spending like this, we'll collapse under our own weight of compassion, as it were. That's exactly right. So they want permanent subsidies to backfill this sort of hole that the CARE Act has fallen into. And Republicans say they want to stop what they call endless temporary spending, which is an interesting thing. And, the problem is that what we have here is it's not a safety net, right? It's something else. It's a problem that we've had for a long time. And one of the things that goes back to it is this whole idea about we're interested in paying for subsidies for health care, but we're not interested in trying to figure out what the cost of health care is and why it keeps going up so fast. So much faster than inflation, so much faster than almost everything else. Except maybe college tuition, but we know why that is, because it's a business, and it's not a nice business. Anyway, so what do we do? Democrats want to roll back these reforms that the Republicans have put in the big beautiful bill. It tightened Medicare spending, or Medicaid spending is what it did. They want to say Medicare. I don't want to make that mistake either, because they're trying to spook people on Medicare, which doesn't have anything to do with that. It trims some of the things that were duplicative out there with various states. I was reading this, and there's a bunch of programs out there that are much bigger than they started out. Isn't that a surprise? Not in government. My gosh, it controls everything, doesn't it? Democrats, of course, it hurts the poor, the elderly, the disabled. women and minorities most, are hit the most. That's just that they say, whether it's true or not. That's just what comes out. The Republicans are just asking, are we trapping people in this mess and just continuing to fund it instead of fixing it? Or are we trying to do something about it? We got layer on layer of entitlement in this country. Every layer comes with debt, dependency, bureaucracy. I mean, you can't keep promising cradle-to-grave government and pretend that, money grows on being nice or a tree of sentiment. I don't know what to do with some of this. Republicans, want to fix it now while we still can. Although let's remember, the Republicans had plenty of chances to do a few years ago when they had Congress and the presidency, and they didn't do it then either. They talk a lot, but they haven't done it. And the Democrats, on the other hand, are saying, don't touch it. Not one little hair on your head. So that's a big issue between the two of them, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot of ground between that. Unfortunately, it's sort of like political addiction, isn't it? That's what's going on between the parties, and that's what's going on with the Democrats. The truth is, this isn't about denying people health. It's trying to preserve our money long enough that it'll still exist for a little while. Then there's a third demand that I trotted down here, and it's really the most telling of all. They want a new oversight mechanism, that is the Democrats. A bipartisan commission to monitor how future administrations handle health care reform. Gosh, oversight, accountability, sounds great. This is not anything except a way to lock in control over any future Republican president and anything you might try and do with the Affordable Care Act. They want to build a wall around their policies, not with bricks or anything like that, but with bureaucrats. Once these commissions exist, they really go away, right? They grow. They regulate more. They get excited by their regulation, so they do some more of that. And what they want to do is want to try and bind the next administration's hands. If it's a Democrat administration, super, because they'll want to do it anyway. If it's a Republican, it's going to make them very hard to do anything in the way of change, except continue to spend money. It's sort of a preemptive strike, I guess, as I'm thinking about it. Now, look, the progressive left out there, they know the political winds are shifting somewhat, although they think that somehow this New Jersey, Virginia, New York, we can talk about that, election somehow means something. I don't think it's bellwether for either thing. I don't think it would have been a bellwether for the Republicans either way. Winsome Sears, great lady. She just didn't have enough support soon enough. I mean, there was a huge machine in Virginia for the Democrat. She just didn't have it yet. I mean, she's not been in politics that long. Citrelli and New Jersey, he was do a good job. He was very close last time. But, there's always a problem when you run someone a second time. How many times does that work out? For some reason, people are tired of you if you run a second time after losing. I don't know why, even if it's been a candidate. So that was something that was a problem as well. And when you look at this, what was going on, heck, they're putting the Attorney General of Virginia is going to be a Democrat who said all kinds of crazy things about wanting to see the opponents dead, their kids, and you've heard of all. And they put him in anyway. Well, so the Republicans are trying to stop that from happening. It's kind of like a preemptive strike. It's sort of like, this is how modern progressivism kind of works. If you can't win at the ballot box, you hammer it into the institutions, to the bureaucracies, courts if you can. You bake that into the agencies, the rules, make oversight boards, and that's kind of what this third concession really is. It's a way to make temporary victories kind of permanent, right? Because it'll establish something that's going to be a problem. So when you put it all together, there are three demands: permanent subsidies, entitlements, bureaucratic control. They're not random. They're part of a philosophy and an idea and a way to try and get something in case by some strange coincidence that a Republican president comes in 2028. They're still probably got a pretty good chance of getting Congress back, or at least the House of Representatives in 2026, and we'll talk about that because that'll be not a pretty thing. It's not really gridlock, really. It's arguments about governance. We don't have hostage politics and shutdown chaos. We have an argument, and the Democrats are trying to bring this along in this really long situation to get things baked in that we've been trying to fix. Hi, folks. Welcome back to the second segment here of the Rick Wagner Show this weekend. We appreciate it. As always, I always like to say that because it's so true, and without you, well, I wouldn't have anything to do for a couple hours on Saturday. So, I would have plenty to do, but it would be things I don't want to do, like, fix things at the house, stuff like that. But anyway, one of the things that's important, I think, that we try and do, and we tried to do it in the last segment, and I try and do it more often, is when these subjects come up, political, cultural, whatever they may be, we tend to have them blasted at us, and then there's no context for it. And people argue about it, and you'd have to spend all your time during the day, if you listen to just some of the broadcasts, trying to figure out the whole picture. And you get bits and pieces, and you kind of get an idea about it, and if you like it or not like it. But it's important that you know more about it, so make up your mind, and it makes you feel a lot better about what's going on because you feel like you have a grasp of it. So I try and take this stuff and go through and try and make a few things, some notes that my poor second grade teacher, Mrs. Slate, she despaired very much of my handwriting, and I suppose by now she's probably teaching proper spelling and handwriting in heaven and probably cursive as well. But I did get a little better. Anyway, so I want to make sure you guys are armed with this stuff, with the nuts and bolts, but in a way that's at least interesting. Because, every week it feels like Washington finds a new way to test the boundaries of the Constitution. So we have to just keep looking at it, right? And I thought during this segment we would try and talk about a couple of things. And if we have time on this one, I want to look at that Supreme Court fight over these tariffs, which we don't get a lot of discussion about, just kind of discussion about that's happening. And I don't know how we can not talk about these threats against ICE officers across the country, right? It's all about power and protection and the limits of power. The tariff fight is about the limits of power for sure. I mean, tariffs sound technical. They're really not. They're constitutional. The Constitution makes that pretty clear. But the case that the Supreme Court has is what is called learning resources versus Trump. They ask a simple question: could the president use emergency powers to impose tariffs without Congress? Well, if you listen to Congress, the president has no power, and they rule by just coming in and raising their hands or saying crazy things into a microphone. That's not the way it's supposed to be run. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act, that's what the president was trying to act on. And it was written for crises like terrorism, national security threats, etc. Now, we're stretching that a bit to cover trade disputes, something the Constitution places squarely in Congress's hands. And you can look at this, Article 1, Section 8, I think. The power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. So what they've said in the lower courts is that all of these tariffs, many of them, are kind of a bridge too far. We can't treat them like we're firing missiles from a war room, and just because we say everything is a war, and use that power. That's what lower courts have said. Now, conservatives should care about this, not because we oppose strong leadership, but we're trying to figure out what the separation of powers are, right? If a president can declare an economic emergency and slap tariffs on entire industries, well, what's next? He ought to be able to do some things like that, but we don't have any guide rails for it or really understanding of it. I think part of the thing that President Trump is doing, he's doing this purposely knowing that he's going to get challenged on it, and they're going to have to come up with a way to force the courts, the Supreme Court, to lay out a way to do this. I think that they'll come up with a way to do at least some of it. They're going to do something with something that he's done. They're not going to give him and say, "Oh yeah, go ahead, it's all right." Something's going to come up. Now, what if? Because hear about this. What if another president, a future president, declared a climate emergency and decided to shut down oil and gas production because of that emergency? So you got to be careful. You don't want this both ways. This, sauce in the goose, sauce in the gander. You know what that is? So the argument for executive power, though, to do it isn't without some merit too. Things move fast. Congress doesn't. Freedom has been slower than the kind of freedom you have for debate and other things. Sometimes it's difficult to have too much of that at the pace of things that are happening. So it's a gray area there about how much can be diverted to the executive because of the pace of change and the way problems arise. So, efficiency isn't necessarily the test of the Constitution, and efficiency really, really isn't the test of Congress. So we're trying to figure out where that line lies. The president's looked at 2 or 3 other sort of sources that he says gives him power to do that. When I look at it, I think there is some strength to that. I think the president can use these kinds of things as a policy measure. His argument, to some extent, is, of course, that tariffs of this sort are foreign policy. And the executive has the exclusive right to conduct foreign policy. These are just tools for policy. Democrats, of course, say, well, we're supposed to do tariffs. But there's some lingering acts and some other things out there that can easily be interpreted to say the president has some power, how limited that might be, to impose tariffs or restrictions on trade. We've never got into it very much. We've never had this come up quite this way before. So there's not a whole lot of guidance. So it's not going to be easy for the Supreme Court. I suspect that it will come out with some sort of straddling the fence kind of decision where they say, well, he can't do certain things, but he can do a couple of others. The issue with that is if he can't do certain things, does he have to give the money back? We'll see what they say. Because if he's collected it already and they say, well, you shouldn't have done that, then he's going to have to reimburse somebody. And that's, it's funny, it will cost money to reimburse somebody. All right, I want to talk about the other thing that really gets under everybody's skin, and that's the battle of who protects the protectors out there, right? ICE agents, Homeland Security, and so forth. I mean, the threats against the ICE agent and this whole erosion of law and order is crazy. You see things on the news now and people saying things that you feel like you're watching a movie, and not a good movie. It used to be that there was like bipartisan support to enforce the law, secure the border, protect the homeland. But now, the people who are trying to do that job, they're under some kind of siege, aren't they? I mean, if you look at the statistics from the Department of Homeland Security, threats against ICE, and I'm reading this from one of the notes I made, have increased more than 8,000% this year, which you've probably seen many places. There's been all sorts of confrontations, including armed ones, shots fired at federal agents into their facilities. We've seen that. There's these doxing campaigns, in other words, where they're trying to get the identities and the addresses of the ICE agents and their families and put that out there so that, just so we know what's going on. No, it's not. It's so some nut can follow up on this and frighten ICE agents and their supervisors into not doing things. The detainee numbers have been going up. We've got, what is it? I think the last I checked, like 67,000 people are in custody right now. That's a lot. So that whole system's under a lot of pressure. But on the other hand, you can't run a nation where law enforcement's afraid to enforce the law. The ICE agents aren't villains. They're protectors. And every slur about, kind of abolish ICE, yeah, well, then what would you do? Well, we know what Mondani in New York would do is you'd send a social worker out, which, of course, will solve all these problems. Every politician who demonizes the officers, talks about, they're masked, they're kidnapping, throws that out there. They're really harming the ICE agents, and it's meaningless in what their foundation is, but it has real cost as rhetoric. You may disagree with the law, you may disagree with enforcement if you want to, but there are other avenues in that besides encouraging parts of the population to go crazy, especially when they're already crazy to start with. Let what's open borders, I mean, come on. That's clear, isn't it? But they don't want to own that chaos that follows. They want to attack the people who, risk their lives basically doing the job Congress told them to do, but they just want to attack them now because it's placed to their base. Well, that's not protest. That's just sort of kind of weird anarchy. I mean, our republic stands on 2 pillars, right? The law and restraint or enforcement of the law are those there. I also usually put our voting, our elections, the sanctity of the elections in there too, but that's also been a problem. If you tear down any of these things, the roof comes down on everybody, right? The founders debated power and duty as kind of two sides of the coin. The left treats them as enemies of each other. You can't defend the rule of law while encouraging mobs to threaten the enforcers of it. It's that simple. You may not like the way to do it, but there are other ways to change it. You can't say you want people protected, you want law and order, but if you don't like the way it's being done exactly, instead of trying to go through a process, you want to go through a mob. You can't defend, as I said, the rule of law if you encourage mobs to threaten the enforcers. It just won't work. Republic has its guardians. And ICE patrols and people like that, there's a better way, if you don't like it, than turning people who have a screw loose on the agents. Stay informed, my friends. And as always, you keep your mind sharp. It'll keep the Republic strong. We'll be back in a minute. All right, thanks for joining us here for the third segment of the Rick Wagner Show, getting it right. Of course, it's not that hard anymore. So much wrong out there that just any kind of effort to get it right is a good thing, I guess. So I have some more issues that I want to discuss with you guys out there because we want to make sure that you get all of the facts about these important issues and not just sort of this shotgun that you get from the news anymore where you have to sit in front of it for 8 hours and try and figure out what they're talking about because they just talk bits and pieces. Mainly, I would say, is because a lot of the people talking about it don't know the whole story. They just know the pieces that are being sort of clickbaited on air, as it were. And then they discuss those, and then they go back and forth, and then another hour starts, and another group of people discuss the same things. It's there's not a lot of creativity out there, I have to say. Anyway, so I want to talk about three things if we can get to them today that I had some notes on that I think we can. One of them I want to talk about, Victor Davis Hanson, as you know, this is great. He has a piece out that I want to talk about this chaos strategy of the left, okay? I want to talk about that. And then these election results that we had in Virginia and New York and New Jersey. I think that there's something to be learned from that. Everybody's got something different they're talking about it, so we can get a little more info, I think, that and do well with it. And then don't forget about this. Proposition 50 in California, that passed pretty easy. And that's going to take this whole sort of gerrymandering kind of argument, I think, national. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's talk first about chaos as a strategy. That seems to be what the progressives are doing, right? What Hansen says is, let's see, what he says, Democrats have increasingly embraced chaos as a tactic. Well, he's right there. Street agitation, the courts, media. It's not designed to solve any problems, but to just kind of keep everybody on the edge of their seat and disoriented, right? And what Hansen calls it, and I like this term, he says chaotic nihilism. He says the aim is not coherence, but confusion. I can't argue with that. Because at some point, turmoil becomes the message. All you see is this disruption. And the hope of the people that are starting this disruption is that you blame whoever's in charge, as though they started it. Now, in some of these places, you need to blame them because they won't stop it. That's a different thing altogether. It's funny how you can have all this violence in a city, say, I don't like Chicago, and you don't do anything to stop it. People get hurt, there's disorder, there's all the sort of things that you think of as crime and that you need to protect the public from, and you don't think you ought to be blamed for trying to control it. You want to blame somebody else because you made people mad, and you happen to agree with why they're mad. That's all that is. They mobilize these people by working a lot of them up with just fear, right? They tell the various subgroups that they are going to do what? I mean, it's always violence, right? Words are violence, this and that. The Republicans get in charge, they'll put you in a camp, they'll do this, to that. All that kind of rhetoric. regular people recognize it for rhetoric. Unstable people recognize it as a call to action. And people who use this, they know that. They're not surprised. Oh, I didn't mean for people to get that way. Yeah, well, you do know that's what happens, right? Because there's nothing positive to sell, right? There's nothing that they, on the left, that they're trying to bring that's positive. It's all sort of reactionary. It's not initiative. I mean, the whole chaos, the fights, the ICE attacks, the whole kind of thing, that becomes the platform. And what you do is you just try and get everybody on their back foot on the other side because of all the violence. You're not going to do anything about it. So the hope is that if it continues, somehow the public will say, oh, well, the people that they're mad at, that's who's causing it. Well, they can be mad at people and have justification if that were the case. It doesn't give you a right to do this. But this is what they're doing. This is sort of one of those things when people run out of ideas. The left run out of ideas. This is the only idea they have, and it's not a good thing for the Republic. You know, we saw this before. Remember, if you studied the Democrat Party, remember 1968 in Chicago then? They tried to reframe that whole platform that the Democrats were doing at their convention. And it was a lot of, well, rioting. And there was this huge police response, and the whole thing was blown up as sort of like, some sort of movement at the time. And it was sort of, but it was a lot of chaos. And it did help people in the far left at that point of the Democrats to sort of reframe their platform, because it spooked people in there, even though the police in Chicago at that point took care of it. In interesting ways, perhaps, but they did stop it eventually. But it still spooked people, and it pushed them left to try and keep that from happening to them again. You know, when we had that Occupy movement, remember that? They were going the Occupy movement, Occupy Wall Street, Occupy this. They had their own little city up in, was it Portland? It was called CHOP. I can't remember what that stands for. And the whole thing was about something about inequality, and yet it was very difficult to understand what they were doing. They were just mad at people who had money and jobs because they didn't have any jobs, I guess. I mean, I don't want to distill it down too much, but the kinds of people that attracted were really not very normal. But it was okay for the left because it created media. It looked like something was going on. At that point, they didn't have any ideas either. And by the time we get here to 2020, at that point, remember all those riots, mostly peaceful, of course, it just changed the landscape. I mean, these were things that were breaking out all over the place. It's not like a Rodney King riot or something like that where it's in a localized area and about an event that took place there. And it started spreading after these, well, very misrepresented police shootings that took place in 2 or 3 places. And it became obvious that to the left, some of this was helpful because it made disorder look like the rule of the day, and it tried to make as though, well, then the administration, they can't control this. Well, not if you're the one stirring it up. And there was a lot going on in there. We're finding that out from some of the movements and where the money went for that kind of stuff, aren't we? And right now, I think the Democrats are refining the same tactic. They don't have any answers. They don't have any positions except outrage. And they're trying to turn that into some kind of fuel for what's going on. And that is, it's not moral, perhaps, but Republicans have better learn a way to inculcate themselves against it. And I think to do that, you have to define what order means. Try and have a simple policy. And I think Trump has done this. Energy independence, education reform, parents having a right about what happens to their kids in school. I know it's crazy. Having some kind of accountability, and of course border integrity, which they're going crazy on the left. And they just won't tell you why. Notice that? They're just objecting to what's happening. But why? Why are you so on the side of some of these people? Some of these people you don't want in your neighborhood because They didn't want them in their country, and so they dumped them into ours. So what are you fighting for, really, on that side? Does it seem clear to anybody? I think if you look beneath the sheet a little bit, you see, what's under the bedspread there, which is that this is all about perpetual voting class at some point. Or it seems to be that way. Sometimes they even say that. And, Republicans have a way of, instead of sort of standing up and fighting back, they accept part of the blame. It's like, well, we could have done this better, we could have done that. And you can't lead if you're always trying to, get yourself out of trouble. You can't lead from a defensive position, and that's why they're doing it. You have to lead from, these are the things that we believe in, this is what we're doing. Not everything's perfect. At no point in time is anything perfect. But we think this is much better, and we believe the country will see it as much better than the alternative, and we'll just keep trying to improve it and just push that. Don't get on your back foot. When you have when everything's a big fire, 5-alarm fire, then nothing becomes that. Everything seems the same. And that's dangerous, because then we don't know what to pay attention to. And that may be the point. Disruption is a strategy. We got to pick our agenda, take it back, and stand firm on it, and not start getting in the business of trying to explain away this stuff. Just say, well, this is what we're trying to do. Why are you trying to fight it? Anyway, and that all kind of goes into what happened on this election night with New Jersey, New York, and Virginia. It's not really about polling and things, but and Real Clear Politics had something on this, and then they called it a 5-alarm fire. I think that's why I wrote it in my notes. That there's sort of a socialist wave underneath this that's coming from the far left of the Progressive Party, and it's kind of pushing its way into all of this stuff, right? And if you look at what was going on, Republicans had a weak turnout in those states. And, of course, it's almost impossible to have a strong turnout in New York for Republicans, especially Manhattan, maybe a little bit in Queens, Staten Island. But that's about it. What's happened in these states is that because they have these crazy policies over the years, that people with good sense have left. So what it does is it turns them more blue. It doesn't have people who have good sense anymore. You have people who are either part of the problem, benefit from the problem, don't understand the problem, or just mad. And you get more of them when other people leave. And I think they're also telling Republicans that you can't just oppose. This is what's funny, is because the Democrats are just opposing Trump, right? Well, we've fallen into the trap of just opposing that opposition. Like I said before, I think Citrelli in New Jersey, good guy, had some good plans. I think it's always tough to run somebody 2 times in a row. And he kind of lost the narrative there. I thought it'd be closer than it was. You never know what's going to happen in New Jersey. When you get this socialism going on, by the way, there's an underperformance in large cities for the whole city in general. They don't have budgets that make sense anymore. So what happens is instead of turning to ways to balance the budget, do things to get back on the road, they turn to what socialism is. Or, if you go far enough down the road, you get kind of, sort of weak tea communism, which is take money from other people. We see that with Mondami. We just have neglected these things in terms of what we're trying to put out. We're a little bit on our back foot here. President Trump is doing things. Republicans are talking about them. But by stirring up all of this rhetoric, nonsense, and so forth, they know what they're doing. Now, do I think it's going to help them in the long run? Do I think people will wake up to it? Yeah, I think kind of. I think that might be true. People may. But in the meantime, it creates enough disorder and confusion that they use to their advantage. Because when you don't have any ideas, really, about what to do in a positive way, just keeping everything up in the air is about the best you can do. Right now, Democrats are mobilizing more so than Republicans. as always, Republicans think that, well, we're doing things, we're in charge, we're this or that, and this is a problem with Republicans because we're people that have real jobs, we want to be left alone, live our lives, and so forth. The other side lives for this. Their entire sort of existence is around protest, destabilization, being unhappy, nothing's ever right. Every problem that they run into is somebody else's fault. This goes on 24/7 with these people. And it's difficult for us to fight that back because we're not wired like that. I mean, they're noisy, and they're trying to win at the margins. So what happens is our infrastructure needs a little more sharpening again, especially when you don't have Trump on the ballot, because he can articulate something, and it brings voters out. Like I said before, there was a light turnout in New Jersey and Virginia both from Republicans. And look at what they were voting for. I mean, Spamberger and Merrill are practically the same person. They're just churned out of the same sort of robot production of these sort of medium to far left governors that come out and say nothing when they're running and rely on the ground game to win anyway. If you look in Virginia, though, in the suburbs out there, once you get outside of Washington, D.C., the law and order messaging worked pretty well for Winsome Sears. But at some point, you got to have a little bit more, and you're going to have to fight harder when you get closer to D.C. Granted, some of those places, it's not going to make a difference. They're never going to change their mind. They'd vote for, Garfield the cat if he was a Democrat. Now, I don't think he is, by the way. Now, Long Island in New York, there's quite a few Republicans in Long Island. And they flip seats in some of the blue areas. People not reporting on that. When you have some realism and you stay focused, that can work. Voters don't really want socialism. A lot of them in the middle here, as it were, just want somebody that seems to have a plan. And Republicans have kind of lost the plan a little bit, particularly on the Obamacare situation, which needs fixed. But what's our plan, right? It's not just about being less conservative or anything like that. It's just about being more credible and having something that's tangible. We go back to that old contract with America stuff. Socialism isn't a choice of government. It's just shouting and trying to undermine the existing order and then putting a label on that. And when you get to that kind of thing, where really nihilism, tribalism, escapism to some extent, and all these other isms coalesce, and they don't have to have a plan. They just have to want to tear down what they see as in their way. So that's what we're dealing with here. This is the strategy, if you want to call it that. It's a strategy of desperation, but it does work sometimes. And it can go very haywire. I know we talk about this a lot, but if you want to see things go haywire, look at the French Revolution. I mean, that needs to be studied by everybody because we have kind of a vague idea about it. And if you go through the French Revolution, the sort of phases that it went through, and some of the craziness, putting up a idol in Paris to reason as it were a god, saying that you're trying to get rid of a religion, but then putting up essentially a golden calf of some sort, if you want to go back to kind of a biblical reference, to reason. So in other words, they're saying, oh, we don't like the way your religion is, so we're going to create a new one, and we're going to elevate this thing we call reason. It's a terrible situation, and it costs a lot of lives, and it costs a lot of stability, and it's really instructive. I mean, it is one of the things in history that you can study and learn a lot from. And we don't talk about the transitional phases in that because we just don't. It doesn't seem like it's appropriate. It's exactly appropriate. Because if you don't watch it, that's what you end up other places. They go through the same thing, Jacobites. And you don't want to be around the Jacobites. So, speaking of Jacobites, California. they passed this Proposition 50. What that did was that shifted the redistricting power for congressional seats back to the legislature. They had it in an independent commission, which was not very good, not particularly independent, but it's going to be a lot better than what the legislature is going to come up with since it's a supermajority of Democrats. And they're trying to carve it up so that they get 5 U.S. House seats so they can flip. Well, you don't carve it up like you invent new things. I mean, they would like to invite more voters in from other places. They're certainly trying to do that. But what you do is you divide it up in a different way so that you neutralize the other side so they don't have enough of anybody in any one district to overcome what you've gerrymandered into it. That's what they're going to do. They're going to do things. They're going to slice up Orange County even more. They're going to do 2 or 3 things so that, yeah, we got a district. Each of them has kind of the same amount of people in them, but each one of them has a minority of Republicans. And the Republicans don't have a stronghold anywhere. They're just cut up. Their walls are knocked down, and the fences are put up around them, and they're herded in a different direction. That's what they're trying to do. Now, Republicans have responded with a federal lawsuit. I hate to see all this stuff in the courts all the time. This is probably a good one, but still, we're letting the courts have become our legislature. And besides that, if California's model holds, blue states all over the place will try it. I mean, don't kid yourself. I mean, let's see. I'm trying to see that 64% approved doing this in California. And in the lawsuit, the people that brought the lawsuit on the Republican side saying that the plan uses race as a dominant factor in mapping, violating protection in the 50. It's race comes into it. It's just really voter registration. If you look at it from that way. You know, voters choose the reps. The reps don't get to pick the voters because that's what's happening. If you want to come up with one way or another, this is a way to let the state government decide at least what party and what philosophy you're going to have by the way they draw the districts. And if you don't win on the map, then they're going to corral everybody in different areas of these gerrymandered districts so they don't have any power. And if you look back at Madison's, Federalist Papers, he wrote something about, and I wrote this down here. I don't know where I got it from. It's probably from these articles I was reading. Faction thrives when power can entrench itself. That's exactly what Proposition is. They're trying to entrench the power to redraw these things within the legislature. It's not going to work. And we need to watch other places like Maryland, New York, Illinois, Connecticut even, that are going to try and do this if it's successful in California. We just can't have that go on because it's, in fact, an unconstitutional in its concept. Well, anyway, thanks for spending some time with me. I hope we brought a little something in there. And you stay focused, stay faithful.
Hi, folks. Thanks for listening. Listen, if you'd like to listen to more and you want to maybe perhaps have someone else listen to our podcast, you can do so either by going right to our webpage, politicalviking.com, or therickwagnershow.com. Both of them take you there. You can get links right directly to our podcast, or you can hear our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, and Spotify, and a couple others. So you can find us. We appreciate it if you do. And if you've heard the show, you want somebody else to hear it, that's a good way to send it to them. Thanks for listening.